This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, integrative mind body medium Kara Lovehart, and we are going to be interviewing Courtney Gable today. We're going to be rethinking and restructuring how we talk about healing and integration, specifically in psychedelic and ketamine-assisted therapies. So I'm very excited to bring her in for this conversation. So let's learn a little bit about her before we bring her on. Courtney Gable is a licensed professional counselor, and she has more than 25 years of experience in integrative mental health and holistic well-being. We love all that, right? Courtney blends top-down therapeutic approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, internal family systems, with bottom-up approaches. So we'll talk about the difference between top-down and bottom-up. And some of these bottom-up approaches are experiential methods like somatic awareness, breathwork, work with altered states of consciousness. And Courtney's approach is trauma-focused, compassion-driven, and rooted in harm reduction. And this is something I'm so passionate about. You guys have probably heard me speak so much about harm reduction. So beyond her clinical practice, Courtney is a certified yoga therapist, an experienced yoga teacher, and she's a certified psychedelic and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy provider with advanced training from leading organizations such as MAPS, Fluence, and the Integrative Psychiatry Institute. She also mentors and trains other clinicians. So if you're a clinician interested in getting into this line of work, she offers accredited educational workshops and partners with nonprofits to make psychedelic-assisted therapies more accessible and ethically grounded. And she's licensed in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Vermont, and she's based in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. We have some exciting things coming up for her that you can actually meet her and get involved that are coming up in the local area and as far as a training as well. So we'll share about that at the end, but let's bring her on and get diving into this conversation. Welcome to the show, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Kara. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and for us to have this conversation. This is the stuff.
I really wish everyone could have been a fly on the wall when we met a couple weeks back, and just to connect and just our conversations there. We were just like, it was the greatest. So I'm really looking forward to going in and unfolding organically as it usually does. So let's start out with just your journey and your integrative approach. So you spent over 25 years blending these mind-body modalities. What inspired you to bring together like IFS, somatic awareness, and breath work with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? And for those who don't know what ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is, you may not have listened to our last couple episodes with Dr. Tony. We'll also have you share what ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is and really what brought you to blend things together for everybody.
Sure. It's a big question, and it's a really, really rich topic. And I think, let's see. Let's start with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and what that is. And something that we'll touch on later is that I'm also a little bit of a word nerd. And so even the phrase ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in itself, I almost want to put like a little asterisk and, kind of break that down a little bit. And so in the traditional sense, if it can be said that there is a traditional sense, I guess, of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, or what is often referred to as CAP, or sometimes also CAT, in taking off the psychotherapy part of the therapy. So it can be ketamine-assisted therapy. What is traditionally done is that the ketamine, which is a dissociative anesthetic, is used in a very deliberate and complementary way with the other therapeutic modalities, which we'll talk about in a moment. But as far as the assisted part, the A in the CAP or the CAT, I tend to think of it a little bit differently. Rather than assisted, I like to think of it as augmented. So we're still keeping the A, but it has a different nuance and kind of a different shade, a different flavor. And we can get into that more. But so I really like to think of it more as that it's a ketamine augmented therapy. And in that, excuse me, and in that, all of these different tools, whether we're talking about the use of ketamine, the application of somatic awareness. If we're talking about body alignment, breath work, voice work, expressive art therapy, the tools from acceptance and commitment therapy, they're all within a broader context. They all fit within the container of supportive, holistic, integrative healing. And so my journey has been really about a curiosity along the way of, what is this? How does this fit? I am a very big believer that, there is not one tool that works for everyone. There's not even necessarily one tool that works for one particular person throughout, a length of time. So this idea of having a lot of supports in place and building a level of fluency and mastery with as many of them as possible, that's what sort of just felt right. That's been my organic process, and I could nerd out about this stuff all day. So does that start to answer the question? I feel like each one of these things, even in the time that we have, they're all tips of the iceberg. So we're
Yes.
we'll touch on as many as we can and go as deep as we can in the time that we have. I hope that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're integrating this it's an integrative model, right? It's
Yes.
putting all the things that you've learned and really customizing it for each person. As you said,
Yes.
not everything fits for one person. So let's talk about the top down and bottom up approaches. So just because some people may not know what that means, I believe the body based approaches is the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about what those methods are, and then the top down traditional talk therapy. Because I think that's something that's really more, I still feel like it's becoming new for people like, oh, yeah, there's something else. And then the therapists are talking about you should do a bottom up approach or we can do these things. But it's still, we're pioneering this
Yes.
in the psychotherapy world. It's something that's just becoming more public, I guess, or known.
Absolutely. And so certain elements such as yoga or yoga therapy, polyvagal work, central nervous system regulation, these are all these are all different. They're all different bottom up approaches. It is the felt sense. It is the visceral sense. It is involving the body in the conversation, not just the brain or the mind. And I do separate those two because there's the distinction between sort of like the neural pathways. And granted, I'm not a brain specialist. I want to be really clear about what my lane is, and that is not it. With the mind, with our perception. And so when we're talking about some of these things, it's important to recognize that there is situational, and there's perspective, and there is biological. And so how do we help support someone who is really robust, right? The human experience is really robust. We are not just talking heads. Although oftentimes when we're talking about a trauma-focused perspective, people are much more cognitive, logical, rational. We want to stay up here because it doesn't feel safe to go below the neck. Right? Everything from the neck down, certainly everything from the navel down can feel really, really vulnerable. But
Yes.
depending on how an individual orients for safety or is able to, and what the environment is, both internally and externally, that orientation can start to feel like all I have is brain. And so how do we welcome back? How do we invite back these other parts of the lived experience?
Yeah.
Because they're there.
I'm really curious about when this stuff started to take off in your field, because as a body worker, this is my entire field, is working with people who have highly sensitive nervous systems, have been through chronic stress or trauma. And it's always been, mine isn't to go into the mental health piece, but it's bringing back into the body. And I do notice that the mind, the mental body, is where people often get stuck. They would come in and, they do sometimes just vent about what's going on in their life. And then they, talk about what's going on in their body, and we kind of reorient back to the body to stay within my scope. But there is this part that's like the mental body is so active. And even on the table, there's an awareness as a therapist, how much that's the escape route, because it's like you said, it's safer. There's until we guide and I help them to be back into that physical body piece. So I'd love to hear when you feel like that started, and maybe also if you have any suggestions for the listeners of any other types of bottom up approaches that people might have experienced and maybe haven't associated that with this term.
Mm. Oh, that's a great question. As far as the field itself, we're talking about really big ships that can be slow to turn, and we are still within a culture that is very sort of medically minded, allopathic, pathologizing, isolating. I think we're still really slow to recognize a bigger picture. I think there are pockets of people who are able to recognize that, and certain communities that are able to recognize that. But on the whole, I think we're still pretty top down. And part of that is, granted, this is the work that I do, and this is the work I choose to do. And so this is often, what I see. But when I look at our culture at large, I see more trauma happening. We have a trauma-inducing culture. There's more that's happening there, that it's happening at a faster pace than we have an opportunity to repair it at this point. And that doesn't mean to give up. It's all the reason more, all the reason why we need more people to be in this conversation and to be exploring and to be doing this work. And hopefully we'll, eventually reach a tipping point, sort of a critical mass in our ability to really create some effective change. But in the meantime, we are, I'm thinking as a licensed therapist, I'm still dictated, in my note taking, to give a clinical diagnosis. I still have to use the DSM. And for those who are not familiar, I mean, that is, it's a diagnostic manual. It's either that or one of the ICD codes, which have to do with insurance. And it is, putting a stamp on someone's experience. Looking back, Gestalt has been around for a really, really, really long time. And that has always included the body in the conversation. And so there are elements that have been around for a really, really long time, but it's not a main thread yet. But I do think we're getting there.
Yeah. I remember a friend of mine, he is a licensed social worker, and when he found out this type of work that I was doing as a body worker, he sounds like you're doing Gestalt type therapy. I was like, no, I'm not doing therapy. That's not my scope. I coach, I teach yoga, and I do massage therapy, and I'm an intuitive professional. So that blending together could look like that. But I was really curious about what that was, and I dove into it. I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I know that if you're working with someone like yourself, some of these bottom up approaches, you said breath work, we said yoga. What are some other bottom up approaches that people might have already done, like on their own, like that they're not aware of, that they could have been experienced already?
Nature therapy is a really fascinating and emerging part of the field, no pun intended, because truly, but the idea that, our nervous systems tend to calm when we are out with the trees and can smell the flowers and feel the wind, and it becomes this multi-sensory experience, and there can be a softening that happens. And so whether that is in the traditional nature therapy process, if you work with someone and you meet, and instead of being in more of a clinical setting or in an office space, you go for a walk around the lake, or go for a hike, that is an example. Or if you're even taking yourself, being in nature is therapeutic. It is tending to the self. So that is one. Yoga therapy, working with a trauma-informed yoga teacher, anything that really involves being aware of what your body is doing. Movement therapy, dance therapy, again, expressive arts. These are all felt. It's about what are you noticing happening in your body, and how do we bring that into the wider exploration?
Yes. Yes, I have a friend that they actually, with their therapist, they would go surfing. Now, they lived in Oahu, so they would get to go surfing as part of their therapy. And that was really, like, I can't even imagine that's amazing. And I feel that, especially if you're not having like a session with your therapist, that is a lot of purging or a lot of vulnerability sharing, just in general. Let's go to the park. Let's go somewhere where we can feel our bodies. We're walking, we're sensing nature, and just the science of that too. I think I have to have an expert come on, talk about forest bathing and hiking, and that's so beneficial. So if you're out there, apply the podcast, guys. We got to get a person on here for that. But I wanted to kind of move into this language and framing we were talking about with augmented instead of assisted therapy, and just like the language in general. I wanted to dive into that. But before we do, I have this curiosity. I had this curiosity about the nature of being in the mental body as a culture. And I'm curious of what your perspective and opinion is on this. Do you think that we're so mentally oriented, and it's a lot of complex things, I'm sure, but with the history of our humanity having to push past the body, right? Having to work, having to push past emotions, no time to grieve, because of work situation, life situations, how we have evolved, and the Industrial Revolution, and how families then have been broken apart, and there's not time to be in the body. And our culture not holding space for the importance of emotional expression. Do you think that culturally we've created a society where we value the mental body more, even academically, and that if that's the case, I know this is a long question, but if that's the case, is that then how the lens of what our psychotherapy and our academic institutions are based on, the lens of the consciousness of what they're operating from? Big question. Sorry.
Big question. No, please bring all the big questions. It's great. I don't have a ready answer. I don't know. It's certainly something that I will ponder. I will definitely, as you were asking the question, I was thinking about what came up for me was duality, actually, that this idea that it's sort of this either or, as opposed to a yes and. And when we are able to connect, when we are able to be in that broader context, when there is more vulnerability because it feels safer to have it, there is less that we need. There is less reassurance that we need. There are less things that we need to acquire in order to feel okay, because we're okay as we are, and we see each other's okayness. And that's not necessarily how our culture is built, or that the machine, it's not what the machine was built for. And to be able to recognize that, and that good, bad, wrong, that is the system that exists right now. So how do we navigate it? I feel like it's also important to name, and this is also, this is something that could lead to a whole other, sort of subtopic, and a whole other rabbit hole, but that within this realm, with what we're talking about, within mental health support and just body support and the lived experience of being human support.
Yeah.
People often talk about things being hard. And in this realm, the opposite, thinking of that duality, the opposite of hard in this way is not easy, it's soft. So how do we learn to soften to the moment that is? How do we learn to meet the moment that is, which is beyond whether or not we like it, whether or not we want it to be here? How do we meet what is? Because it's already here. We can't have it not be here. So how do we meet it in a way that doesn't further rupture? How do we first kind of stop rupture, and then how do we create opportunity for repair?
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the kind of answer.
No, I love that. No, I love that so much, because you're right. Like the right and wrong thinking, or good or bad thinking, I think is a product of how our brain starts to operate in black and white thinking when we're more in like a stress response. So I think if our culture is in a big stress response, there's always this narrative of right, wrong, good, bad, better, worse. And I think that question that you asked about how do we allow, how do we accept and soften, and what is your, for your own self and for your own practice, or what is your current answer? Because it's probably going to change and evolve, right? What is your answer for that question?
It has a lot to do with, I don't know if you've ever talked about the term pendulating in the podcast at all, but
let's educate the listeners for that.
Sure. So for those who are not familiar, it's this idea of stepping in and stepping out. It is when to lean in and when to lean out. And that is a really dynamic process. It is, we can talk about the framework for it, the container, but really only you know what your capacity is for softening and when it's time to step out. And so this idea of understanding a window of tolerance, which is something that it's a framework that I use a lot in my work. And I want to be clear. So when we talk about this window of tolerance, it is, it's a continuum, and there's an upper limit and there's a lower limit. And there are things beyond that. If we think about this in terms of nervous system regulation, when we get too charged or triggered or activated, when we cross that threshold in the upper limit, the adrenaline and that skittish, that fight flight, that comes in, and freeze can also be in there. On the lower side, there's collapse. And so there is just that complete just implosion, just that everything just crumbles on that side. And so there is a large, hopefully large middle ground. We think, kind of like the Goldilocks zone. And for some people, their window of tolerance is here. and for some people it's here. And what we want to do is we want to help people, first of all, recognize where it is, and then hopefully continue to build the containers so that it can grow, because that is something that has the capacity to do that. And at the same time, we're also skills building so that when a threshold gets crossed, hopefully it happens less frequently, but when it does so with less intensity and with less duration, and the ability and the confidence to be able to return, knowing that I can bring myself back. If I go too deep out into the water, I know how to swim back. If it gets too hot, I can step out. If it gets too cold, I can warm up, so that there's an empowering quality that goes with this. And when we talk about trauma, power has been taken away. Trauma is incredibly disempowering. Your choice has been taken away. Your consent has been taken away. So this is a tool by which we can recalibrate that balance. And doing it in a way that this is not with a crowbar. This is open-handed. This is heart-centered. This is compassionate. This is opening the space so that what can rise needs to rise, can be attended to.
Yeah.
And there's permission.
Yes. I love that. I've noticed in myself, my window of tolerance, my capacity and bandwidth for stress, as I've learned boundaries, learned tools, and learned these body top down and bottom up approaches for all things integrated for myself. And what I've watched and seen in family members and colleagues and clients, that they've been doing this too. It's a really beautiful, empowering, like you said, that you can, that lived experience of being able to find and meet your own safety and your needs when you need it, and also reach out when your needs are not able to be met by yourself. I just think that that's the journey to empowerment, and it's a really beautiful experience.
Yes. I love beautifully encapsulated. I agree 100%. And that it is a window of tolerance. It's not a window of liking or disliking, right? It is, what can I handle? What can I manage? What can I tolerate? What can my system tolerate?
Yeah.
And I think, even for people who are unfamiliar with this, hopefully for those who are listening, that they know, I think hopefully most people can point to an experience when their body has said, nope, I gotta step out. I gotta take 5. I gotta, and that is a visceral experience. It signals something in the mind, but this is bi-directional. It's not only one or the other. This is an ecosystem. We are within ourselves ecosystems, living within larger ones.
Yes. I'm loving all this language that we're learning, right? So pendulation. So we talked about this window of tolerance. If listeners haven't had a framework, a word to use to talk about what they're experiencing, and then the assisted to augmented ketamine therapy, or therapies that are augmented therapies. So I want to dive into a little bit more why we talked a little bit about this, but why we feel that shifting the wording is so important, and your specific precision in using language for understanding the acceptance of maybe some of these alternative modalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Our language and our thought are so inextricably tied. And so where there is greater specificity of language, there's an opportunity for greater specificity of thought, and vice versa. And so when we talk about assisted, we tend to think about, okay, so if here's baseline, we are seeking to bring up to the baseline. So we're looking at below, bringing up to base. Whereas if we think about augmented, it's not necessarily coming from a scarcity mentality or a lacking mentality.
Yes.
We can be at the baseline and we are then looking at enhancement.
Yes.
So again, thinking about this in terms of thresholds, it starts from a different place and has the capacity to go to a different place. And it also, from my opinion, from my perspective, it feels more respectful because it
Yeah.
indicates a wholeness rather than a lacking. We are not
Yes.
broken, requiring fixing.
Yes. I love that so much because I know that you guys have to use the DSM and you need to use, codes for insurance, and even labeling can be helpful for someone if they get a diagnosis. But at the same time, I think that language in general sometimes gives people, this awareness of that something's not right and I'm not whole and something's wrong. So I really love that augmented, that does offer a foundation for it to go in a deeper place. So, what about the trauma focused instead of trauma informed language that you prefer?
It has been my experience in all of my years of working in various capacities, various hats, various roles, that trauma is really at the root of all of it. Whether we're talking about individual trauma, whether we're talking about collective, intergenerational, ancestral, that these are the wounds that we carry with us and impact how we feel, our self-concept, our cognitive filters, all of these things. And so if we have the opportunity to explore with the default, knowing that those wounds are there, and to tread with that level of compassion and respect, it feels more empathetic. It feels more compassionate to me in doing this work. And it feels more honest that, even if we're talking about treatment resistant depression, or if we're talking about anxiety, that those are still trauma. They still have their root in something that is trauma. And excuse me, and the word trauma is used a lot and sometimes overused, and which is a whole other word nerd thing, again, getting into language. But the idea that we are all walking around with a wound or wounds and a level of tenderness. And if we can meet each other with a level of, shared experience, to use it as an opportunity for connection rather than, again, kind of pushing that you're broken in need of fixing. I don't know, it creates to me, a stronger foundational base. Does that answer
Yes.
it?
Yes, it does. And I think that there's so much education that's part of this because, even in my work, that word trauma doesn't track for people, especially if they're not in the mental health field. It doesn't track for people because there's an associative term. The term is associated with PTSD, or,
Mm-hmm.
like that there is, I don't have trauma. And then even if someone educates them otherwise, there can be the sense of maybe something's wrong with me, or a shame, or especially if they haven't gone into the self at all to look, there's this vulnerability about that word, that term, that can turn people off. And
Yes.
in my course for teaching massage therapists, the course is called Restorative Touch Massage Therapy for Chronic Stress and Trauma. I use the both words because I know that chronic stress is something that so many of our clients will associate and identify with.
Yes.
And, but it really is, like you said, the nervous system has had imprints of trauma. Like it's something, whether it's, you know, the depressions from the trauma or, you know, the anxieties from the trauma. It's like, it's just the words that I think, like you said, the nuance of these words is so important. And especially when it comes to educating, and how do we bring the education of to our culture, which is a trauma inducing culture, as you state, how do we bring this awareness to people who are not in the mental health or the healing field? You know, with what language do we use?
Yes, and it's conversations, right? It's so much conversation, curiosity, exploration. These are things that happen one-on-one, in small groups, in workshops, in trainings, but that it's easy to forget, I think, sometimes that, you know, that our language is an approximation. Right? You know, Aldous Huxley talked about language as being the reducing valve, and working with ketamine and working with people in altered states, and whether that's from, you know, breath work or from a molecule, people often come back and they'll say, I cannot, there are no words to describe what the experience is. And that's okay. Don't try. Just feel that experience. And eventually there will be some words that are an approximation, but that they cannot encompass the totality of the experience. And so we're doing the best with language as we have it, but it doesn't cover everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when just in by nature of getting involved in services that expand or alter your normal waking conscious state, you're altering it. And I do think that the language nuances are so important to bring more awareness of those things, because it's not always this or that. It's paradoxically, it's so many things when people have these expanded states of experience or consciousness. Yeah, yeah. What about the flaws in the system? Like with our current healthcare system and the mental health systems, how do you stay hopeful and maybe continuing to create change from the inside out, rather than dropping out of the system altogether? Because I know there's people that have done that. I know that people are like, no, it's not, I can't be in the system. Medical doctors I've met psychotherapists, people are just, I'm jumping ship. And my perspective, I love to hear yours, but my perspective is let's integrate. Let's change it from the inside out. But what is your thoughts on it for you?
Everyone has their own journey. And so I believe, and this goes back, you know, I'm thinking of this kind of in terms of acceptance and commitment therapy with ACT and you know, values, with values and integrity, and being aligned, you know, with your, you know, with what feels fair and appropriate to you. For some people, stepping out, they're pendulating, right? Like that's what they need to do at that time. We stay in as long as we can. We leave when we need to. And that can look like so many things. For my work, I want to hold the space as strongly as I can for there to be transparent, ethically aligned exploration. Sometimes that does, as we talked about, that sometimes that does having, like, we do have to sometimes include these pathologies, but that they are not the totality. And so how do we work within that framework and honor the wholeness of a person and of their experience and where they are in their journey, and really checking in that it is ethically aligned. I am also a very big believer that if someone is going to step in and do this work and hold this space, that they need to be really doing their own work. And that doesn't have to look any particular way, but that the willingness to sit in the discomfort, and the willingness to stretch and grow and look for your own blind spots is really important. I think it's really, really critical because we're each on our path. And anytime that anyone says, oh yeah, I got this figured out, or let me tell you, you know, no, thank you. It is, there's always more to learn. There's always more growing. There's always opportunity for more connection. It's all part of it. It's all part of it. There's no part of consciousness that isn't part of the journey.
Hands down, absolutely, 100%. Courtney, 100%. Yeah, I really love what you said about, being involved in this type of work when you're working in both vulnerable populations, or not just populations, but just all of us. We're all vulnerable. We don't need to use the word population. Vulnerable in these spaces and these, altered states of consciousness even. And if you're not doing your own work, that's really the foundation of it all, in my opinion. And I love that you just modeled that. You modeled that earlier when, I asked the question, like I said, these providers are jumping ship, and it could have. I love that your perspective and what you shared really helped me in just reorienting. Yeah, my statement of that could have come off or could have been perceived, with the limitations of language to our listeners, that I was implying that that's wrong. And I love that you stated, everyone has to follow their own journey. And if they're pendulating, like that may be the right thing for them. And so just in your actions and your behavior and how you modeled that right there, that's just coming from this place of like as much openness and non-polarization, understanding everyone is integrating in their own way and accepting. And let's move into a place in a posture of curiosity. That to me is so, like, you can't fake it. You can't fake that you're doing this work. So it's beautiful. I really, so like moving forward, then I want to talk about the work, what you're doing, what like a typical psychedelic or ketamine augmented therapy process looks like for you, and then how you help your clients integrate afterwards. Let's dive
Sure.
into that.
Absolutely happy to. In terms of, let's take the psychedelic assisted or psychedelic augmented therapy part first, because of where I am licensed and able to work, it is much shorter. We can take the deeper dive into the CAP and the CAT. So because I am licensed in states that do not yet have access to other molecules, the way that I am able to work with people who are exploring elsewhere with those is that I'm able to provide what I call sort of like the book-ended service, the preparation and the integration for people who may be going either, whether that's outside of the country to have an experience, or if they're going to Oregon, or if they're going to Colorado, places where they have access to things that we in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and don't. And through the lens of harm reduction, I'm never going to say to someone, oh, that's a bad idea. No, you shouldn't do that. That's because it's not my place. But I will talk about, how do you know, orienting for safety, how do you know that where you're going is going to be safe for you, or as safe as possible, in order for you to willingly step into that? How do you know that the molecule, it is what it purports to be? Are you aware of the sources? Are things ethically sourced? So these are conversations that when I was in school learning to be a therapist were things that I didn't know. Like that these are conversations that now happen on the regular is really unexpected, and again goes to that sort of organic unfolding. So in terms of the ketamine work, because that is something that is legal, I can hold that space in a couple of different ways. There are still times when I'm doing a little bit more of the book-ended service, as I referred to, with more of the PAT work, because they are working with someone else elsewhere, or they are there's so many different, if we did like a Venn diagram, there's all these different potential flows. So it really is custom based on, who else the person is working with, what the presenting challenges or what brings them to this, what their supports look like outside of it. But if someone were to come and say, Courtney, I need you to walk me through sort of this whole process, and I don't have other resources, and I'm not working with anyone else, what is available? There is a partnering with a medical provider, because I do not provide any of the medicine. I do not have prescriptive authority. I do not want prescriptive authority. I'm very happy that is a complementary lane that I respectfully do not veer into. And so someone may either come to me having already been cleared by a medical professional, or they may come to me and I then refer them to a medical professional for that full evaluation, for that medical and psychiatric evaluation, because ketamine is not appropriate for everyone for a variety of reasons. And given that you've had some recent podcasts about that, I'm guessing, I have not had a chance to listen to them yet, but I'm guessing, did you talk about the sort of the disqualifiers at all?
I don't.
No. Okay. So there are some medical and there are some psychiatric parameters for that, which we will put those on hold, and someone can Google them, or we could put them in the show notes or something like that afterwards. But assuming that someone gets the green light and says you are safe to proceed, then we are starting a preparation process. We are getting to know each other. If we're not already working together, we're building that therapeutic alliance. We're building that therapeutic container. And I think one of the things that's really interesting in some of the research about the CAP process is that the modality of the therapist is less important than the actual therapeutic relationship. And so whether you're trained in ACT or whether you're trained in CBT or whether you're, insert, modality here, the most important thing is the genuine human connection. And so that is what we are building in that preparation time. We're also going through clarifying intention and what brings them to this at this point in their lives. And this is not something that is generally a first choice modality. So people are coming to this having tried other things and also having experienced the disappointment of other avenues not bringing them where they want to be or feel that they should be. And we can put should in for a whole other conversation, but that idea that they are not where they are flourishing. And so we manage expectations. We talk about what the actual experience may be like if they are working with the medicine orally, what that is, because there are several routes of administration for ketamine. And there's a couple different ways to take it orally. There's intramuscular, there's subcutaneous, there's IV. And so all of these things will vary slightly in the preparation. Also, depending on the intensity of the dose, sometimes people are taking a really deep journey, what people would talk about as a psychedelic journey, even though ketamine is not considered a classic psychedelic because of the brain receptors that it's hitting, but you are in a deeply altered state. You are elsewhere. It is taking you elsewhere. But in lighter doses, it can actually do that softening that we talked about before, right? So it is softening the activation, that central nervous system kind of hairpin trigger, it can soften that so that actual content may be explored without it feeling overwhelming. I've actually had people report, wow, this is the first time I've even been able to think about that without it sending me over the edge, and that it can safely emerge. And so my role in that during the actual dosing sessions can vary from really just being a compassionate container for that, for there to be safety, to being a really active, supportive participant in their exploration, but that it is all client-led. And then on the other side of it is where the deepest of the work begins, because that's the integration. So there's been this experience, there's been this springboard, and then what happens? So how do we take it from being this sort of abstract and unique and in many ways can be phenomenal experience, and actually help integrate it so that it enhances your quality of life going forward. And integration is then really ongoing for the rest of your life. Not saying that working with me is ongoing for the rest of your life, but that integration is ongoing for the rest of your life. There is a neuroplasticity that happens within a finite window, but the intention of building and continuing to build is really lifelong.
Yeah. Yes. I know that you said when we were talking before that people can come to a facility with you, or you could go to their location too. You said like Mary Poppins, right? You were like, I can travel to you.
Yeah,
So
I
can you tell
sometimes
us more about that?
sure. So under certain circumstances, depending on geography and depending on stability and support systems and all that, there are times when I will actually go to someone's, and I have this like really cute bag that I bring with me, and it has everything but the medicine. It has eye shades, it has, my computer, it has a speaker, it has headphones, really, good noise canceling headphones, it has little ginger candies, it has, kind of all of the different elements, but you are already oriented for safety in your space. And so one of the challenges sometimes in working with ketamine is you cannot drive afterwards. And so that can be a barrier to care for people if they cannot, find someone who they know to take them, or if, an Uber or a Lyft, some kind of rideshare is not available. And those can be very, very expensive. And also sometimes people don't necessarily feel safe using them. And we do have different protocols if someone is getting into a car with someone who they don't know and checking in, when they're home and all of that. Again, this is about building safety. How do we continue to build safety? And so the idea of bringing it to them can be really lovely. And it's something that I've really enjoyed doing, to be able to hold the space in someone else's space. But yes, there is that. People come to me that also working in retreat settings. And so there's lots of different ways to do this. And then as far as the actual schedule, that can also depend whether or not we're focusing really more on the biological lift of working with the medicine, or whether we're working with the more content-based emergent material. And so that can look like 1 to 2 dosing sessions a week for a period of a few weeks, or it can look like a session as needed, periodically. And so there's a really wonderful fluidity to it. It's not haphazard, but that there's a fluidity, there's a flexibility, which is ultimately what we're looking for in all of this. We're looking for psychological flexibility, emotional flexibility, that idea of, we want enough integrity that we're not collapsed, but not so much that we're rigid and brittle.
Yes. Fantastic. Is there anything else you want to share about what working with you looks like before we go, and just want to talk about your mentoring other clinicians and some of the things that you've worked with that?
As far as working with me, if people have questions, they're certainly welcome to reach out. I work with individuals, couples, and small groups. And I have started taking insurance. I was completely out of network for a long time, but in really trying to reduce barriers to care, we have to make this more affordable. And I have started working with insurance. That does look a little different when we're talking about extended sessions, because insurance will only cover the first hour. And so there is other conversation that goes along with that, but there's lots, it's flexible, right? There's ways that we can try to, make this work so that it's sustainable for you.
Yes. And we're going to talk more about the Central Pennsylvania Psychedelic Society, or if you're listening from another state, getting involved in your local nonprofit organizations. A lot of them are supporting not just education, harm reduction, but sometimes access to care. So through fundraising, which is part of what the Central Pennsylvania Psychedelic Society is embarking on too. We'll touch base on that. But let's dive into working with the other clinicians. What are some of the biggest lessons you learned about being ethical and working at these intersections of trauma and consciousness, and then even this big change in our culture we're seeing?
Biggest lessons. Ooh, keep being humble and curious. I am also a believer of assuming goodwill. That if something is happening in a conversation that I don't understand or that I don't agree with, my goal is to seek understanding and connection over being right, which is sometimes challenging in and of itself. It is a practice. It is a muscle to be worked, just like a bicep or a tricep. And so in working with other clinicians, to help them be able to meet the work that they're doing with curiosity and confidence in their competence. So there is, again, like so much of, there is a threshold, there is a continuum, knowing that you have knowledge, but also knowing that you don't have all of the knowledge, and that there's always more to learn, and that there's always more to, offer and grow, and how to navigate that as a professional and as a fellow human being, as a fellow community member. Yeah, those are they're big themes. We get into cases and and all of that, we get down into the nitty gritty, but it's the container that holds all of it.
Yes. And you make up a foundation of that container as a clinician. It's
Yes.
yeah.
And which is an honor. It's an honor to do, and it's not a responsibility that I take lightly at all, ever.
Yeah. And that's where that safety and trust comes in. Just listening to you and hearing from you, and so I think about the future of psychedelic augmented therapies and working with reshaping mental health care. And you are the type of person and the type of people I get to speak to. I'm so fortunate to speak to individuals like yourself that hold this level of integrity and care and compassion, and doing the work themselves, walking the talk. It's just really, I'm just really so grateful to be able to connect with you on this. But let's zoom out though. Like, what do you feel, like a wide view that you see in this field? What gives you hope for the future of psychedelic augmented therapies, integrative therapies, and the mental health field?
I love you using the word. I appreciate.
Yeah. I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it. And then if someone's like, what do you mean? I'm like, listen to that podcast episode I did with Courtney Gable.
That's great. What gives me hope is every single time that someone reaches out, that someone shows up for a session, that someone asks a question about what is this stuff, even if it's, hey, I read this on this social media, and a friend of a friend of a neighbor of a cousin, right? Anytime that anyone is coming with a question, for me is that's a flag. That's ooh, there's a willingness here. There's an opening here. Any opportunity to have a conversation like this warms my heart. This really does. This is knowing that there are spaces that exist like this, that there are people who are willing to craft them out and hold them, is what gives me hope. And as a parent, helping to support the next generation, I am hopeful that there are younger beings who are learning that fear doesn't have to be the driver.
Yes. Yes. And I just think it ripples out so much, the work that we each of you listeners do individually, even just the work, or we could call it play. Let's call it play. The play of listening to this type of conversations or podcasts or books or things that inspire you, even if the action steps and behavior changes aren't happening yet. It's just those are the things that make an incredible difference. And I always feel like I want people to give themselves credit for that. If you're listening or you're trying to make changes in your life and your relationships and anything, that is amazing. Gosh, we got to stop and pause for that, because that ripples out to our children, to our neighborhood, to our community, to our culture. And it's all of us doing this. We're all rowing in a direction of growth. Even if we row backwards temporarily, we're trying, we want to move. And that's really what I see.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't always, not everyone can host a podcast like this. So grateful to you, Kara, that you do. So grateful. But not everyone can. But listening to this, having conversation with someone about it, making eye contact when it feels safe to do, holding the door for someone, being kind, showing up with some kindness to self and other in any way that you can, that's from my opinion, that's work worth doing.
Yeah.
That's where it is, right? It's in each breath. Each breath is an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just so in love in this conversation, Courtney. It's incredible to speak with you, and you're doing amazing work. Could we talk about some of the upcoming things you're doing in your own individual work, maybe upcoming trainings you have? I know you're speaking at the Psychedelic conference. For those of you who are not aware, that is a psychedelic conference in Philadelphia at the University of Philadelphia, I believe.
It's at UPenn. Yeah, it's at University of Pennsylvania.
You've been to Pennsylvania. And I went to that, I think last year, the year before, and it was amazing. It was so cool to be in the space with so many people who are pioneering and doing research and having conversations and just discovering more and through this lens of curiosity. But yeah, let's share what you have coming up.
Sure. Thank you for that. Yes, I'm going to be on a panel at Philadelphia that is focused on accessibility, on access to care and sustainability, because it is there are a lot of barriers to care. We'll just leave it there. There are so many barriers to care. And so how can we do our part to help make these tools more accessible? And so I feel really honored to be part of that conversation and to be part of that community. And then I'm going to be, in January, I'm going to be with you all in Central Pennsylvania with the Central Pennsylvania Psychedelic Society. And actually, I'll throw it back to you if that's okay, because you know more about the event than I do. But yeah, I'm going to be doing a workshop, continuing ed, about ketamine-assisted, ketamine-augmented therapy, and just a 101. And for those who are interested in it, one free CE is available for to that workshop. It is in person. So it's old school. You got to actually show up in person, and hopefully, we're going to have a good time. We'll have a nice time.
Yeah. I'm really excited for this. Our organization met at the same location last year, and we're just meeting again to starting moving into offering. Again, the goal is to destigmatize, to educate. That, in my opinion, is one of the elimination of barriers, because we have to educate not just the general public who are listening on the podcast, but also clinicians, and give them access to understanding how this could support them if it's right for their journey as a clinician, right? And free CEs is great. And let's just clarify, like, you don't have to be a clinician to attend. You can totally attend. Anyone can attend for interest and curiosity. And I'll put information in the show notes for registration, sign up, information on the Philadelic. Those will be recordings for those talks, and many other professionals and researchers too. So I'll put that information too, if you guys want to get access to those and check that out. And also direct information with Courtney and any of her resources, websites, contact information, and stuff like that. Yeah. Anything else we missed?
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I think we covered a lot, and we could probably also talk for hours and hours.
Yes. We'll finalize with our two.
Yeah.
We'll finalize with our two final questions I always ask people when they come on the show for the first time, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So first one is, what's your favorite wellness product or self-care practice right now for yourself?
I'm definitely inclined to say it's a practice rather than a product. And it is, I'm kind of stumped on this one. To pick one, I'm going to go classic, and I'm going to say meditation.
Yes. What type of meditation do you enjoy?
There are a few, actually. So I do love classic seated meditation, but also the idea of bringing a meditative quality to the conscious experience, and whether I'm driving, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, it's just sort of like the tasks of the day. That for me, my container is through a lens of compassionate permission to just be present with what is, which sounds so simple, but simple and easy are two very different things. And so trying to really just let myself have permission to soften to the moment.
Yeah.
And I put that under the umbrella of meditation. And so in the moments of quiet, building that as much as possible.
Yes.
And it doesn't, you don't need, right? You don't need anything. You don't need any tools. You don't need any stuff. You just need you.
Yeah. And I think that practice is really interesting, because I can only imagine it just increases your self-care in the moment without having to be doing anything that's just you, with a book or tea or a bath or something. And also the probably increasing your window of tolerance, right? Because you're regulating yourself in those spaces. And I feel that that's very commonly a practice that I do. I guess I relate it to more mindfulness, but it is a form of living meditation. So yes. I love that you do that. And I feel like it's almost like a non-negotiable in my life, because it's those moments are when I feel so good. Like I feel so good, even though I'm accepting this moment is, this isn't exactly what I want. I'm accepting this disappointment. I'm content with the discontentment. And that's something that's been a practice, and it's come into my life more recently. The being content with discontentment is such a weird thing to say, but it's such an interesting, like, the experience itself feels whole and feels so good. So I love that.
The honesty of it, right? The giving yourself permission to feel what you are feeling. You are already feeling it. And so allowing it to be, allowing it to live. I love what you just said, that there's the recognition of, the moment is the moment. I might not like it. It might not be what I want, but that is what's here. How can I be mindful in such a way that I'm not then heaping on the suffering, right, on top of it, that I should be this, or I should be content with this, or I shouldn't be this. And, when we can take that boulder off, things can really feel so much lighter. And it doesn't mean that they're easy, but that they can feel lighter, and you can breathe, and you can get through this breath, and you can get to the next one. And don't get me, and yes, I still love a good cup of tea and a good book and a bath. I love all of those things. Yes, for all of them. Yeah. But the bowl that they are all contained in is that mindfulness and that meditation.
And I feel like that's just a testament to your very being and how you show up for yourself and how you show up in your work. What you just said there, just fully, being and accepting in this moment and being space, being a holder of compassion. So I love that. Then the curiosity then, because this last word is, I could say it does imply that there's something wrong, right? The implications of my final question is, if you could detox one thing in the world today, what would it be and why? So let's go into that. What your answer to that would be based on the previous answer. I'm curious.
I've it's something actually that I have been thinking about, and I'm a little reluctant to use this word because the charge of it, but in thinking of our trauma-induced and trauma-inducing culture and the ways in which we have found creatively to cope with it, to adapt to what is, a rather, toxic and unhealthy environment, we have seen a reinforcing of, or fortification of, the self, that hardening, that need to kind of hunker down and become more rigid for fear of being run over, of being lost. But in that sense of self-preservation, I think culturally we've become addicted to our identities. And so if I had the magic wand and I could, I think I would help people. I would want people to recognize that you don't have to be addicted to your sense of self in order to be okay.
Yes, I love that. That is like the work that you do. That is such an answer. And my total passion for expansion of our consciousness. We can't expand it if we're rigid in the identity point of what it is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Love that.
Yeah. It's right. There's so much light, and it's like there can be a laser, there can be a flashlight, there can be, or there can be a huge expanse. So zooming out from that laser.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This conversation has been super amazing. You guys, if you have further questions, if you love this episode, share it, give us a review. We really love to hear from you guys. It really supports us. And just the interest in this topic, we got a lot of response from the last 2 episodes we did with Dr. Tony on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So this one is like a different flavor, different background, and totally, again, the conversation is just as juicy. So if you guys loved it, let us know. And other than that, we appreciate you all for listening. Thanks for being here, and we will talk to you guys soon. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. If you loved this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.